but you can start writing checks. For materials, for labor, for rent, whatever your business needs, you write the checks. The people who get them can deposit them or cash them and spend them on anything they want. And that's how it goes into circulation. The money that you buy and sell things with came from that source. And that money circulates until you start to pay back the loan. And as you make the payments, that money disappears again. The problem's the 14th card. In this example, the banker created $100,000, but wants you to pay back $110,000, or whatever the interest charge is. And you didn't create that extra $10,000. So unless somebody else takes out another loan to put more money in circulation that you can earn to pay your interest, there's not enough money available. But other people do take out loans, and you earn that and pay your loan off with the interest. For them to pay their loans plus interest, there has to be more money borrowed the next year. And then for those people to pay their loans with the interest, even more money has to be borrowed the year after that. And every year, more money has to be borrowed than the year before, but there's not enough for everybody to pay their loans plus the interest. And some of them can't gather up enough money, go bankrupt, lose their businesses, lose their jobs, lose their homes, and the hard times of a recession are inevitable if the system's not expanding. So that's a problem. Now, the analogy with the Cowboys breaks down here in that the Cowboys are really stuck. They can't make cards. But we do make wealth. We take things of a lesser value and we make things that are more valuable. In the process, we're creating wealth, and that's managed to sustain the system for some hundreds of years. But the problem is that we're now stretching the limits of the natural resources that we use to make that wealth, and the byproducts of our production and the goods after use are stretching the limits of tolerance on the planet. So even though that system is a great stimulant for human activity and providing abundance, and not to mention waste and all the things we've tried to do since we mastered basic need, it can't continue because of the limitations of the planet, so it needs rethinking. The recession we're in now is slightly different from the one in 1990. The foundations for it were laid on August 15th, 1971. When Richard Nixon was the President of the United States, and he got on the airwaves and he addressed the entire world and said that the United States will no longer pay bearer on demand $1 worth of gold for an American dollar. Anybody seen American money before that? It all said, we'll pay bearer on demand. And it was all just a piece of paper that represented wealth in gold. The entire monetary system of the world was connected to the material world through the value of gold in US dollars. And when Nixon severed that connection, it gave money new qualities. It made it possible for it to flow through wires at the speed of light. It made it possible for it to multiply without any reference to the planet on which it's used. And it took a few decades for people to learn how to make vast fortunes from these new qualities of money. But I'm going to move forward to another US president, George W. Bush, in the days after the 9/11 event. He got on the television and he addressed the American people. He said, America is under attack. Get together with your families. Go to the mall and shop. That's what I thought when, I traveled to the States with these stories and people were saying, that's right, we're under attack, the president says go shopping. And he had a reason. The reason that he said go shopping is people were shopping. And the US economy was enormous, and it was being supported by frivolous spending. People were encouraged to borrow money on the increasing value of their houses and just keep buying because the thing had to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So, this crazy buying stuff is going on. And all of a sudden, they're being cautious. And people who had borrowed money to get products to sell were in danger of defaulting on their loans. And they could have had a recession right there on top of whatever else was going on. So go shopping. People didn't do it. So they lowered interest rates to practically nothing, hoping people would borrow money for anything, keep the money flowing. But they didn't go for that. They were being cautious. It might be their business that's falling next. They don't want to spend their last money on the assumption that everything's going to be fine. Then somebody got an idea. So there's a lot of people who've always wanted a house but could never afford a down payment. So they started offering mortgages without a down payment. In some cases, you didn't even have to have a job. You simply had to want a house. And if you wanted a house enough to sign a mortgage document, for every document signed, $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 went into circulation, and the economy was saved for a while. Until the summer of 2008, when the price of oil went up to $147 a barrel, and with it the price of everything that has an energy component, which is almost everything. transport or making it or running it. So we had inflation. And what governments do to deal with inflation is they raise the interest rates. So they raise the interest rate, and then a lot of these subprime mortgages that people were really not qualified for in the first place had interest payments on top of their other payments. And so many of them couldn't make those payments, defaulted on their loans, for their houses were foreclosed, the housing market was flooded, and the entire global economy came tumbling down. Now, to put it in a bit of context, the price of housing had been going up and up and up. $100,000 house might sell for 150, and then 200, 300, you know, just up and up. And every time it sold, money would be borrowed at interest. The sale price is added to the gross domestic product, and look, the economy's growing. So everything was fine to provide the illusion that we could maintain a growth economy when we've actually reached the limits of our planet. In that example, there was no more housing. It was the same house, it was just more expensive. And what they did with housing, the value of stocks and bonds, and then the whole derivatives phenomena, were all expansions of what money was being borrowed and interest paid on that didn't have substance. And they gave the illusion of growth until the bubble popped, and then it collapsed. And they're pumping like crazy to get money into it, to try to get it growing again. They're having troubles. There's only two ways to make it grow if there aren't substantial material developments to take place. One is to blow financial bubbles. The other is to undermine other people and take their wealth. So neither one of those are very acceptable. And we need to recognize that the reason the economy can't expand on a healthy basis like it did in the 40s and 50s and maybe even the 60s is that we fill the planet, and there just isn't that room to make an economy grow exponentially within the confines of this finite planet. It's like climate change. It's clearly an example of the atmosphere can't take more of our waste without changing. Peak oil is an example of how we can't draw more of that resource than we're presently drawing because we're stretching those limits. So these are all indications that the human family is now mature and needs to metamorphose into something more appropriate for this time in history. There's lots of ways of organizing mutual provision that don't require a debt-based money. An economic system is a system of mutual provision. It's not about the money. It's about the knowledge that you have, the skills that you have to make things that are of use to other people, and our willingness to trade with each other. And as long as people understand what we have to do to provide the basics to trade and the goodwill within the community to maintain that trade, then it doesn't matter what the global financial system is doing. This is a lot of what the transition initiatives are looking at, is how do we reestablish a local economy so that we're not carried away by the excesses of this global monopoly game that's past its best before date. So this basic introduction to the economic structure, there's lots and lots I could talk about, but before I move on to life, is there any details there anybody would like to have cleared up, or some directions that they'd like to sort of hear a little bit more about? Yeah.
Mike, will you say more about the mutual provision concept later on, or?
Well, I can like give an example of one. It was interesting because there was 5 speakers at this symposium at 12 yesterday. One of them mentioned as a, I'm trying to think of what he was actually talking about food systems and the sort of circumstances that led to food problems, but he mentioned the Pharaoh's dream about the 7 fat years followed by 7 lean years. And people are familiar with that story. Anybody not? Okay, I just checked. What a lot of people don't know is that after the dream was interpreted and the problem was identified, Joseph was commissioned to establish an economic structure to manage the fat years to provide in the lean years. And what they did is they set up a system for storing grain where they had good quality storage so it wouldn't get eaten or get wet or anything like that. And farmers brought their product in, their harvest in, to the storage facilities, and they were given clay tablets called ostraca that had the time that they brought the crop in and how much they brought in. And they could come back with that and get their grain back, less a storage fee to maintain the system. Or they could, then trade had been in grain. That was the main product, and people would just deal in that. But what this meant is that it was possible for them to use the ostraca rather than, the bulky grain to, get some work done on their fields or fix up their house or whatever they needed. And that meant that the only time people came back